Is it TransUnion? International? Did I say internal? Sorry. Please keep our data safe. Estevao, Tokata, CEO Open Xchange Africa. JD Master, Business Manager at SABC, although you are changing jobs. Tell us what you've been doing up until, what's it, tomorrow? Okay. And then Oscar Stark, Chief Strategic Enterprise Architect, Liberty Group South Africa. So let's pass the mics on and just tell us what you actually do. What's not on here.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for the opportunity. So I'm Nolan John. I run operations for TransUnion, so pretty much look at how we do business with customers in all the different geographies that we operate in. So every country that's not in, well, any region that's not a US customer or a Canada customer falls within my portfolio. So I have teams in India, Africa, Europe, and so yeah, it's not true.
Cool. I'm JD. I am the business manager for PCS Combo at the SABC. That's basically the station manager of 5FM and Good Up FM. I'm also headed up digital sales for the last couple of months as a special project for the SABC. What I do, so if you don't know, 5FM is this really cool, kick-ass young radio station for the young people, the party people. So we get to party a lot. No, I'm joking. we get to cause a lot of havoc on radio and events and have a lot of bunch of fun. Usually get a lot of controversial presenters who say things and we have to go deal with the BCCSA, stuff like that. No, in all seriousness, what I do in business language is build multi-sided business platforms, basically bringing audience together with an advertiser. And SABC, the corporation that we are, we're very much responsible for building the product, which you hear and hear, see on the ground, feel on digital, all that sort of stuff. And then we also work with the clients to create bespoke media solutions for them, whatever they want to do. And AI in this conversation is exceptionally interesting in our space.
Do you want me to go again?
And we haven't heard what you actually do with that.
So my main focus is actually around growth. And growth just comes in two different ways. It comes in, everything that I'm talking about is actually what we're trying to do. So it's all around upliftment in terms of our existing customer base and net new customers in terms of growth. And then, building and scaling out our business. We're still seen as a startup. And it's all around growth, and we're going through some radical changes now because of the fact that businesses, as they grow, they morph and they change, and as we scale, we need to figure out solutions to that. So everything, operations, sales.
Yeah, so Oscar Stark, day job is helping to figure out where the company needs to be in 24 to 36 months in the future. So that kind of comes with some obligation to help digitally transform the organization. And so you would appreciate when you're kind of transforming the organization, you're dealing with people, processes, technology, data, and then some ugly stuff you just don't talk about when you're sober. The night job is actually, it's kind of a more fun thing, I think. But it's focused around helping the organization build a capability that deals with disruptive innovation. Now, appreciative that disruptive innovation sounds very cliche, but effectively it boils down to having established an innovation impact center that is focused on helping to cultivate startups and taking those startups through the journey of getting them viable and then starting to commercialize and scale them over time. And why we're doing that is that kind of entrepreneurial focus is something that we want to infuse back into the organization at some point in time. Because if you're a business, we all have our realities that we're dealing with, but the digital transformation journey gives us a lot of interesting tools and abilities to do stuff that we wouldn't necessarily have been able to do in the past, especially if you start embracing platform business models. But you're going to have a bit of a different mindset when you start looking at those opportunities, which does deviate from the traditional corporate mindset, and hence kind of focusing on some of these disruptive innovation efforts. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Estevao, and I know I'm going to get this question afterwards. So my name is Portuguese. It means Stephen is Steve and not Escobar. The drug lord. Although I see some of my friends, and I won't mention that, has that on their phone. So I've been involved in the payments environment for literally the last 35 years. In my tenure at Woolies, where I looked after systems for them, Woolies Financial Services. And when I left the country and I went to work in Europe, looked after EMEA for First Data, and I known as Fiserv, world's largest payments business, very exciting. And in 2010, I got tired of corporate. So no plan B, started a company called Transact Connect in the payments environment, that we built payment models for third-party payment providers, and application providers, and commercial models. And then COVID hit us. We lost a lot of money because we were about to go to market with a product that put a card in somebody's hand. And what COVID did, it changed that environment to contactless. And we used COVID as an opportunity. And that was after I had my little pity party about the amount of money we just lost by not being able to go to market. And I think we went into lockdown in March. We were supposed to launch a product in April, so it was millions of rands down the drain. It wasn't a happy time. But then, long story short, we took the time during the lockdown to think about, what's next. And I said to my colleague, in this time somebody's going to fall, and maybe we need to buy a platform and stop developing models for everyone else, because we know what to do, we know how to do it. So let's do it. And we acquired a company called RTG, and a year later we discarded it, thought it was rubbish. So big mistakes in that. And we're about to go to market with two really, really insane products. Very exciting time. And this whole issue of AI, man, we eat, live, sleep, and drink. So it's a very interesting topic.
Fantastic. Oscar, you can grab the mic. My first question will be to you. You can ask the panelists a few questions, but I also want to keep some space open for questions from the audience. We are running behind. If you're not now, you're going to be stuck in serious binds and traffic, so you can as well wait it out. And afterwards, you're going to chat more and have another drink or so. So, Oscar, in the era of digital transformation, and also working for a large organization like you are, I often think that organizations are going digital, but are they actually transforming? I don't often think that happens. The question is, how can organizations, big and small, improve their engagement with their clients in this era of digital transformation?
Good question. Because when you think digital, people are going to have this abnormal bias towards technology. And quite often people miss the point that the technology is about enabling this process. If I kind of look at our business, we, for instance, have a strong intermediary base that actually engages with customers. And so for us, it's not about necessarily changing the way that these guys work. It's about equipping them with the tools so they can actually spend their precious time to cultivate the relationship with the customer, as opposed to doing a bunch of admin in the background, which can actually be automated. Now that typically talks to levels of efficiency you bring in, but on the other end of the spectrum, if you start looking at digital transformation as a mechanism to fundamentally change your business model, that creates different opportunities to potentially partner with other companies to be able to sell other value propositions to your customers. But in that space, you need to be pretty tight with your relationship around your customer. And so the digital transformation journey, in essence, is there to help you with that engagement and creating value for your customer, more so than it is to fundamentally just kind of change the way you're doing business. The tricky bit, though, is you need to get your eye off the tech and actually get your eye onto the customer. So that's really where the focus is.
Nolan, next is to you. Jess, you're going to just play hockey stocks for me. Customer relationship management. Is it buying a tool only? What about the strategy around it? Maybe of your career, what do you wish you knew then that you know now from a CRM point of view? And keep it under 4 hours, please.
Yeah. So in my prior life, I was also with a bank. And I think one of the challenges that we have is designing from a customer point of view. And I think a lot of the pressures we feel inside of these organizations very much led from a profit and loss or P&L point of view. So the pressure that we feel is reduced cost, but the real challenge is how do you balance customer experience. And I think the insights that I've gotten over my career is you need to engage with not just external customers, but internal customers. Traditionally, a lot of them have the answers about what makes your customer base tick. Very simple things about understanding that when whichever channel receives a contact from a customer, the way that we speak to those customers, the way we address those needs should be intuitive. A lot of the time, it's a very forced discussion because we don't understand what drives not just the customer, but what drives the organization. So that opportunity to have the next conversation with the customer is very limited because we deal with the present need. And I think that present need is so transactional that people are trained to be transactional. And I think to elevate the discussion, it was a great point earlier about how do we get these insights into the different channels? Because once you elevate those insights, you elevate the people to have the right conversation. So typically that's what I found. Technology can be a very, very strong enabler to do that, but equipping them with the skills to have that next conversation is a very powerful tool.
Absolutely, thank you. JD, what role can technology teams play in unifying the different business units? Because I think often technology is seen as just another department, somewhere in the dark corners. It's sometimes a bit of a grudge purchase of sorts to deal with tech, especially from a support point of view. And also it seems that technologists are naturally often very technical, and that business acumen to deal with different business leaders in areas are often lacking. So can the technology team play that unifying role, and what should these teams do to, as it were, up their game?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question and point. So I'm technically minded as well, so I also sit in the dark corners late at night trying to figure out all sorts of fun things. But I think, if I take our context, the technology team is what actually enables us to do our jobs so much easier, so much more efficiently, so much more conveniently. So a real life example for us in the media space is when COVID hit, and we wanted to keep people safe, you had to broadcast from home. And this was a completely new sort of mindset to overcome, because it's always, you've got to be in the studio because it's got to sound right. But technology enabled us to you can broadcast from wherever you want to broadcast. We can broadcast right now. It was funny, I had to train the presenters on sound and treatment, so telling them, take the microphone and put the blankets over your head so it doesn't sound like you're in a bathroom or a room. But that was a technology team enabling us to do something and keep us safe in a very, very difficult time. The technology team, and I always have really, really fun conversations with the technology team because we talk about the opportunities that technology gives us to do things better, faster, cheaper, and to the point is, I echo the sentiments that technology is not the disruptor, it's an enabler to disrupt. And so in our environment, for example, if we want to do things quicker, the technology team typically can help unify us by enabling us and giving us the tools and also the mindsets. And technology also can change a culture, which is the digital transformation conversation we had. And that changes the mindset, how people think they can approach things. So it changes your creative solution ability. Now you think, I've got this problem, but I'm able to do it like that because we can do it like that. So yeah, all in all, it's funny to say they sit in the dark corner because that's the visions I also had back in the day. But it's luckily that conversation has changed. But the conversation with the technology team is not just our printer's not working and they like the IT crowd switch on, switch off and on. It's not like that anymore. It's a conversation about how do we make the business go forward, and it's all aspects of it, which is why this is so interesting. It's how do you make the employee's life better to execute easier, and work from home is a great example from that point of view. Automation is a fantastic point of view. Instead of chasing 10 signatures, it's a system that just does it quickly, but also how does it improve the customer relationship, which in turn makes the employee look better. So it's a massive driving force of the success of the company as a whole.
Thank you. Charles, from your presentation earlier, we saw indications of seamless communication over channels. What are the challenges that organizations have as they scale? So at a certain level that they're getting it right maybe, but now they're scaling rapidly. I guess there's a lot of pitfalls to avoid to make sure that seamless integration is still there. What's your experience around that?
So I guess if I listen, you know, the secret is to understand your customers. I mean, it seems to be a common thread that everyone's saying, and in order to understand your customers, there's different ways of doing that, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, in terms of going and understanding your specific customer segment that you want to work with. We've heard the concept of tone now in terms of how you speak as well, that I think came through from TransUnion, was that it's important to be able to speak to your customers in a tone that is relevant to your brand. And in order to do that, you really need to have a better understanding of your customers. And we see this in terms of this unified space coming together, how I communicate versus any one of us over here communicate can be completely different, and that can affect the customer experience in terms of how they're dealing with. I mean, I call it a brand's handwriting. And that is a challenge, although we're seeing with artificial intelligence, even that being overcome, because it's able to create, and I mean, we've seen this if you go and ask ChatGPT to write something in a business tone, or you ask ChatGPT to write it in an informal tone, or you ask it in a happy tone, or you can start to create tones in that. And I guess that's where I think the challenges are going to be for organizations as they aggregate together to get this common way of communicating back to customers. In there, I mean, 5FM is a prime example. You said it's a fun, you described fun, young, party-like environment. Very different to a Cape Talk or 702. Those are the kind of things that you can't just bring someone and unplug someone from something and bring them into somewhere else to deal with the customer. You need to get that translation. So I guess still, how do you educate?
We laughed earlier. I was speaking to JD around, I don't know if you remember the 5FM days, and now all of those DJs are Jacaranda and some other channels. When I flip through the channels, when I get to 5FM, I realize I'm too old. So I'm aiming for a young audience. Estevao, I want to ask you around, what is the balance? And I think it's tricky, especially in certain industries, if it's highly regulated. For instance, also in the era of privacy and increased regulation, hopefully with AI, the balance between being innovative around how you reach out to your customers, your CRM, etc., and things like security regulations. That's a fine balancing act. You can't just go cowboy out there and CRM and chat with everyone in the way you want to, is it?
Yeah, it's not just a balance, it's actually a throttle in South Africa in particular. We're in an environment where we deal with just so much regulation. And so you've got regulation on the one side, and you've got the customer on the other side, and that customer is demanding a service right now. I want it available. What I want, I'm going to tell you when, where, and how. And you try and manage all of that, try and be profitable as a business at the same time, but also having to adhere to so much regulation. And thank heavens we were finding ourselves, and this is after many years of push. The National Payments Act in South Africa has finally, the Reserve Bank has acknowledged that as fintech organizations, we have a role outside of the banks if we want to make this thing called financial inclusion work. So there's a role for us, but they're not necessarily laxing the compliance and all of the rules and regulations. However, what they are finding is how we participate, and I think that's important, because right now we have to answer to banks in every way or form. We can't enter the environment unless we talk via a bank, and the bank gets to decide whether we get to play or not. Right? So that's changing. On the other hand, from a consumer perspective, in terms of the product that we want to do and we want to push out in terms of the way they want to see product, we spend so much time just trying to understand the customer, understanding the needs, and then balancing with a safe environment. Whether you are sending money or whether you are receiving money, it's your money. So we're probably in such a sensitive environment that we can ill afford to make a mistake and lose the trust of the customer. So it just conceals us. But there's technology, we use it. We use it in terms of how we understand our customers. and use AI in terms of then what products we push, and then generative AI in terms of what does a product look like, but we don't push it to the client until we're happy that it's true, correct, and what they want. But it's a fine balance. A lot of grey areas.
I'm going to stick with you, and then we're going to go through one more set of questions and then open up to the audience. In the age of social media, where every man and his dog can say whatever they want, especially if you're running for president again, for instance. You might do it from your prison cell soon, but anyway, moving on. Can we monitor in real time what clients are saying, expressing on social media, and can we react to it in real time? Is it possible, do you think?
One of the things that we spend a lot of time on that, because and first of all we try and think about what platform is the customer going to communicate to us, which channel are they going to use, and are we as an organization happy to engage with them on that channel? First of all, because you have to man it 24/7. Let's start there, right? Otherwise, if something bad gets said, by the time that you're actually there reading it, it's spread and there's 1,000 comments, right? And then you automatically in a reactive position. So we try and collect as much data of clients. We dig deep. We know everything. The minute you contact us, we get to understand and try and gain as much information as to who you are and what is your preference before we even ask you of communicating with us. So, we live in that world of omnichannels, and like I said earlier on, they want to tell you when, where, and how. You got to be ready for when, where, and how do you do that? So we spend a lot of time doing it. It's a tough environment. You don't get it right the first time, but you've got to understand who they are, what do they want, and then how are you going to present to them, and you cannot be in a reactive position. So and with so many of these new, we've had 2 launches now of new social media platforms. Right, you're trying to manage the existing ones already, and other ones are popping up, and people are just converting across to it. And before you know, you're sitting, you said, I don't have a presence, and I'm not there, right? And have I lost a certain amount of clientele, etc. So it's a crazy environment. I don't know. I hope I'm answering
I think it'll be tough to stay ahead of where it's going.
Absolutely. I wake up in the morning, right, and I spend my first 2 hours kind of just reading what happened at night. And when I'm reading what happened while I was asleep, I'm reading of all these new applications and all these new technologies and different ways to apply various uses of use cases elsewhere. And by the time that I actually have to go do some work, I'm tired. I'm saying, where do we go from here? But it's exciting. But there is a balance to the consumer channel, how you communicate. But listen to the customer. That's important, always.
Oscar, on the back of that, how do we measure and improve customer satisfaction? Is it just digital? Is it just AI? I don't know about you, how many of you actually wait for the survey at the end of the call, especially when they couldn't really help you and you're frustrated, knowing that whatever you say, no one's going to call you back. I don't even know if they're going to use that data. Do you also feel like that? If it's, how good are we, 1 good, 10 bad? I 10 every time because it is that bad. No one has ever phoned me back. Is there maybe room for, I call it like a mystery shopper, a digital mystery shopper? Like I asked a banking client the other day, because the bank I'm at, the chatbot is crap. And this client is at the bank and he said the chatbot is great. And then I asked him, have you actually used the chatbot? And he said he hasn't. So should we not, especially at an exec level, maybe visit the branches, use the apps, etc. How do we measure? There must still be a human element more than just the AI stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, very much agree. We need to eat your own dog food. The sad reality is a lot of the kind of measures that we're exposed to is more like a tick boxing exercise. We have an NPS score and we kind of reference it, but it doesn't actually mean much. And what you're looking for is the mergence between that actual experience and the value outcomes the customer is interested in, and how that is actually enabled. You want to understand those friction points. Now, it's kind of great to use artificial intelligence, but it pre-assumes that you actually have understood the process yourself. Otherwise, the artificial intelligence is not necessarily going to know what to look at. And that highlights the fact that people need to kind of take ownership around those engagements and experiences that they're trying to cultivate for their customers. Because the technology, once again, is just an enabler. It will allow you to not just look at one customer, but all your customers' experience. But you first need to build that base of understanding. And that's typically where you do need your people to actually play a significant role. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in a culture where a lot of the problems are being formed out to be tech problems. And they're actually business problems to be solved for first, before you can actually then apply the technology to help enable it.
Thanks, Oscar. Charles, how do we practically improve our response times, especially first call resolution? Do we throw more bodies at the call center, etc.? What are these practical steps to increase our response times?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that, and I just want to circle back to the beginning of this queue. So there's this misconception, and I just listened to what you were saying, so I just want to add some things to this, because that comment you made about a channel and do you add more channels and can you service them is a misconception in today's world. That is a multi-channel mindset. If I'm servicing a voice channel, telephony, 24/7, then there should be no reason why I'm not servicing a WhatsApp, an Instagram, a Facebook, or whatever channel there is out there, because I'm already manning it. So the more channels you throw at it is not necessarily going to change it if you're manning it 24/7. So I think it's important to understand what you're manning from a channel, and I'll get back to how I'd circle back to this question. So for me, you can have 20, 30, 40 channels, as long as it's being aggregated in a meaningful way that surfaces insight in terms of what is coming through from that individual and tying it together at an underlying layer, which is this unified customer record, in our case what we use, and I'm sure everyone's got a different point of view, then I don't think it matters. And there is no way that we can scale our organizations with manpower. It becomes way too expensive. Telephony is the most expensive channel to service. Just by the pure fact that you have to have a person there, you've got this cost that is sitting over there in terms of breakout and in terms of people manning it. There is only one way of going forward and scaling it, and that is by using automation and using the future in terms of AI, not to reduce cost, because there may be cost, but to increase your return on investment so that your costs disappear because you're growing your business. So from my perspective, I believe that as we move forward and as we start to see the younger generation coming up, 25 to 35, I'm telling you now that do not use telephones to phone in and to call a call center. They don't do it. First of all, it's expensive. They don't buy telephone minutes. They buy data. Okay? And with data, you cannot make a breakout telephone call. You can phone on WhatsApp, and you can definitely type, and they can type super fast. So moving forward, definitely anti-mailing telephones. It's about how we get better insight in terms of the aggregation of data that we're collecting. So I do believe in aggregating data, but it is how we aggregate it and how we surface it to be meaningful so we can respond faster. That's the only way to scale.
You know why they type fast? Because great is GR8 or BC cucumber, so I don't know if you can read your children's text. That's why they're so quick, you know. I wonder if AI would be able to read that.
Well, these are all abbreviations. What we used to call them 3-letter acronyms, and now they're just symbols that they utilize. And yes, the AI does pick up on this stuff. It is trained, that's what it's trained to do. The challenge is that we're now moving away from large language models and we're moving into a crossover between the likes of DALL-E and large language models. So it's getting exciting.
Makes it complex as well.
Yeah.
JD, thanks, Charles. Maybe back to what you've alluded to earlier, and given 5 FM, the station I don't listen to. In our market, we have the complexity around languages, cultures, and obviously age groups. African languages is highly misrepresented in a natural language space. You know, they say there's up to 3,000 accents or languages and dialects on the African continent. And most of our technology would be English or Spanish, Portuguese, etc. So from a customer relationship point of view, given the complexities of our market, And we can't be all things for all people. What are some of the things you think we should keep in mind?
Sure, that's a heavy one, because it's exactly what we have to deal with at FAR, to be frank. Because we don't target a specific language, a specific person. We target a specific age. If you look at the South African context, it's a diverse group, especially youth, and it's diverse in the sense that yes, there's 11 different languages, all are different cultures, there's religions, but then there's Western influence, there's Eastern influence, there's African influence, there's European influence. So those nuances are very, very difficult. And the way we approached it was to it's sort of like a superordinate culture that's been formed in the youth sector specifically. So we know that those are the nuances we can focus in. My understanding would be that you can't be everything to all, because when you do that, if you stand for everything, you fall for nothing. That's ultimately that saying. To get it right, and again, if we look at, from my perspective, the media landscape, and a lot of media companies are getting it right, but the hyper-localization of content, which is linked to the language question you're asking, works. So Netflix has got an Africa office, they're doing African content, South African content, Showmax is doing it really, really well, and the same thing with Amazon, same thing with Apple. All of them are creating hyper-localized content. Shaka Zulu, Ilembe, for example, Showmax is a phenomenal show, doing really, really well because it's hyper-localization. And it's difficult, this is a very difficult concept to comprehend, because when we talk digital, we always think mass. We think millions and millions and millions and millions. And you don't want to talk hyper-localization because then you talk niche. When you talk niche, people think your customer base is getting smaller, and then from our point of view, at least, we can't sell as much airtime. Same concept, if you have to go niche, it's a lot more resources for a smaller consumer market, smaller amount of people you can sell to, for example. But ultimately, the world is moving that way, where that access to what you want in your language or your culture, convenience, preference, choice, and behavior, it adapts to what you want. We all watched, what was that show, South Korean one on Netflix, Squid Games, and that was all subtitles, for example. So we have access to things from all over the world, and that one just worked because it resonates to various psychological things in the mind. But you've got to be able to tap into what makes a person tick. And the world is evolving as cultures are evolving, and we are merging religions, races, languages. It's getting to that point, and we'll eventually get to that point. But in South Africa, identity and culture is very, very important still. Where you come from, your roots, very, very important. But again, when we look at a room like this, or you look at the room full of our people, there's not specific historical sort of legacy, it's what's there now. But again, so you can speak at that level, but you need to be able to tap into the things that make that person tick. Their formative years, how they grew up, how the parents raised them, all those sort of things are important. It's the same thing with language. If you don't know the nuances of different languages, you're going to get lost very, very quickly. If you look at music, for example, in South Africa, music that is English does relatively well, but then you look like a Nasty C, or you look at like a Blackie, you look at someone else who's got Vernac in there, Casper, Questa, does excellent. If you look at any sort of language in South Africa in the music sector where it's specific to the language sector, it does really, really well. English actually doesn't do that, quite frankly. So you have to be able to do it, and I think it's a difficult thing to understand, because again, to my prior point, is you think digital, you think the whole world, everybody's got a cell phone, everybody's connected, there's Wi-Fi, there's data, okay, in South Africa it's a bit of an issue. So you think mass, but at the same time, if you want to get really, really good at it, you need to be able to talk to who you want to talk to in the way that they want to be spoken to. And you need to have a conversation with them, not speak to them, which is a very, very important thing. But from my experience, playing on ChatGPT, playing on Google Translate when I was in Beijing, I used an AI Google Translate because I don't speak Mandarin, so I didn't know where I was going, I didn't know what I was eating, so you just take out your phone and it's instantaneous with the translation. The technology is helping with that tremendously. I do feel, quite frankly, that it is going to miss the nuances which makes the thing tick. But as it learns, I think it's going to develop, and the more we put into it, the better it's going to get. And again, just to veer off a little bit, Ricky Rick, for example, he passed away last year, and he just released a song through artificial intelligence. And from a creative point of view, and this kind of links to the language point of view, the emotions and the nuances which makes him a creative artist actually came through quite nicely. And they're doing this with music, left, right, and center, and there's a massive conversation going on around that. A lot of artists don't like that for various reasons. It's the same thing with copywriting, for example, in our space in the advertising sector. I was thinking about it the other day. So our process is a client would brief us, and it's in a brief, a document. This is the promo they want. And we would have to send it to our copywriter, who has to go and write it based on the knowledge of our audience and the brand and connect the two things. And then, there's a whole process. Whereas with, for example, ChatGPT, because we played around with this, you just take that brief, you put it in, you say, make it 30 seconds long, writes it for you perfectly. And we played around with it a lot. We said, write it in Afrikaans, wrote it in Afrikaans, like, please make it informal. Put in all Afrikaans slang. So AI is really getting good at this stuff. And to a point where, when you but if you send that script back to a client, they probably wouldn't know if it was written by us or AI. But yeah, I think you need to be able to do it in specific languages, and the more you do it, the more it's going to learn, the better it's going to get at it, and it's a matter of time, but it's that exponential growth is insane.
It's a lot of fun. I'm sure many of you have done this, to play around with ChatGPT and ask it, explain it like you would to a child, for instance. A real fun thing is to say, explain it as a narcissist. Now then it will vomit out, it will say it's against our user policy, etc. Now and then you come through, and then it will say something like, I'm the only one in the world who can explain this, and you must only listen to me. No one else can do this as good as I can. And then it starts, it's like, wow, sounds like people I know. Melvin, I want to, maybe before we go open for one or two questions, the topic of ethics. In a world where it's not regulated, in a world where we are highly competitive, I think often we have to make a decision between we can do it, but should we do it? And just maybe because we're the good guys, or there's a reputational question, but we're not really under the hammer to not do it. Given customer experience, maybe just the bigger AI picture, what's your view on ethics?
Yeah, look, I think I work in an industry where the balance between compliance and ethics is also a very interesting conversation. So you can adhere to the letter of the law, but I think the ethics comes in when you make practical business decisions on a daily basis. So how much am I willing to, protect my data? What's the cost involved in protecting my data? Do I want to incur that cost? And I think in the way that the world is evolving, and everything we just talked about today, that is the foundational capability that is at the core of what we do as business. How we protect the data, the way we behave when we have that data, the way we expose the data, is really what I think the next generation is going to have to think about. The next wave of business leaders coming in is going to have to grapple with, yes, there's a cost to doing business, but what's the implication of not doing it? And I think that's where the business world has become so commoditized with technology and, artificial intelligence and all of those good things. But at the heart of it, people want to know that your brand is loyal to you as a customer. Anything you say to them is trusted. Anything you say and do is protected. I think those fundamentals will not change. In as much as we have very sexy technology and very sexy ways in which we, do business, ethics is at the core of any customer value proposition which we put out there. And that's not just from, organizations taking that responsibility. It's down to employees in the business doing that. Very, very practical example, I used to run big call centers, and, we're asking people that in most instances don't earn a lot. And we're dealing with high net worth customers, for example, in the banking industry. So it becomes very lucrative to say, how do I just take this data and give it onto a loan shark who's prepared to pay me X amount for whatever I'm sharing with them? And it's down to how businesses makes that employee part of the value chain. Onboarding of customers and onboarding of employees is not just about process, it's about learning the brand loyalty, the brand values, and trying and finding a way to instill that in a very practical way. So for me, unless you make it very practical, you put that responsibility back to the front line. It's not a top-down driven thing. And your brand stands for those values. I think that's only
Thank you. We're going to have a very exciting product demo soon, where hopefully we will see everything we're talking about here in action. I want to ask, maybe first, for the sake of time, if there are, let's take two questions. You can either address it to one of our panelists or in general, and then you can just volunteer. If you can just stand up so we can hear you at the back there, sir.
Hi, still good afternoon. My question is to Oscar. I've been a Liberty client for many, many years. And the only communication I get is my premium upgrade. Just to find out from you, how are you thinking about using AI, innovating, and how do you engage with your customers? Keen about that.
Yeah, it gives that special feeling that companies thinking about you, but not everyone you want them to. So, at this stage, our deployment and use of AI is very much internal. Using it more on an analytics context to better understand. To your point, you know, if you put something out there, it's real, it's in front of the customer. And we're not of the opinion that artificial intelligence is where we feel comfortable putting that in front of our customers. We'd rather use the insights we gain to better start solving for the engagement towards the customer, especially when it comes to our intermediary space. So they're actually better equipped to understand some of the nuances that they might not appreciate when they're sitting in front of that customer, based on some of the insights that we've generated. And that's kind of how we're looking at it at this stage of the game. Appreciative that this will probably evolve over time as we get better understanding around what the power is that actually lies in artificial intelligence and how we've informed it with relevant data. But at this stage, we don't want to do any harm. You know, you're already getting that letter, which is obviously the greatest of experiences. I know what I'm talking about because I also get that letter.
Shouldn't it be an intermediate? You must find a new intermediary that looks after your portfolio.
All right, last question perhaps from anyone? Just raise your hand.
Okay, I've got a question.
Okay. There's two of you and you were rapid fire.
Okay. So it's there's an expression that says the customer experience is the process. It's a very simple statement, but it has massive implications for businesses. And I think the way that we're dealing with, we talk about the promiscuous customer. The allegiance is to the moment, it's to the passion of what I want, and it does require business to be agile. So my question, I'm kind of sketching the context of my question. The question is, are we at a level of maturity in our businesses? Or are we applying these kind of transformative strategies? But are we mature enough to deal with these complexities around those kind of expressions?
Volunteers.
Journeys are different for everyone. I might want to climb a mountain. The route that I take would be different to many different people but my objective is to get to the top of a mountain. And I think the nuances that you're talking about are what I mentioned earlier, is that we've moved from where we think we understand the customer journey to a customer building their journey on the fly and organizations being agile enough that where they pick you up in that journey based on data that's been gathered, to be able to understand simply where you are in your decision-making process, because we're talking about customers. So I'm going to use it, you talked about process. I think if I simplify process, is it around support? Is it around something that I need or I want, or whatever it is that I've tried, that I'm contacting the person that's offering it to me, and where I am in that journey, and how do I extend that journey to, once again, I like the word delight the customer. So I agree, there is no set way anymore. It's on the fly, and we have to be agile enough as organizations to do that. And that's where it comes into a specific salesperson. Let's go back to like the simplest thing. I walk into a store as an individual, I meet salesperson A, and that salesperson A gives me a specific pitch. I meet salesperson B. Some salespeople are better because of how they understand the customer and what they've listened to what the customers and how they've interpreted, and some are just poor. And that's the same thing that's going to happen in the digital age, and it's the same thing that's going to happen when you start to augment and that. But the idea is to augment with someone that's giving you that other perspective. You said you want multiple perspectives of it. I don't think it's about the AI being able to answer and to take over that process. It's about exposing different things that you may not have thought of during that process. And the more intelligent I can get to do that, the more successful I'm going to be in the journey.
If I may add.
Yeah, sure.
So to answer your question, quite frankly, maybe a controversial point of view, I don't know, but I don't think your question was quite straightforward. Are we mature enough to handle this? No, I don't think so, quite frankly, because we, in the South African context especially, are too scared and afraid that this will take away jobs. And in a country with the unemployment rates we do, that is not a very popular thing to do. So, you know, if we can, and we were talking about this earlier, so automation, you've got a production plant, you can get 2 robots to do the job of 100 people, for example. What, in South African context, if I ask you, as a South African citizen, not as a business owner or exec, because execs will say, get the robots, it's going to be more productive, our bottom lines will be higher. But in South African context, your answer would be, hell no. We need to employ 100 people. And as society, at our level specifically, I don't think we're ready for that just yet. I think we are a little bit, you know, it's about how are we aligned at a macro level? And we're not aligned to it. We're aligned to making sure the unemployment numbers drop. And the worry is, again, not seeing the foresight to the long-term vision to understand that if we want to be a global competitor, we need to be able to beat the other ones that are doing it. And manual labor is not it. It is being able to build the machines and systems that can do the jobs, because that's when Germany's going to come to us and get our engineers and our software programmers and so forth to build those systems for us. So long story short, and this, you know, I think the problem in our context is no, we're not mature enough because we're afraid it's going to put more people on the street. Whereas my true opinion is it's actually going to be the opposite. It's going to create more because we're going to be able to make more money as a country, which means we're going to get more foreign direct investment, which means our economy is more stimulated, which means we can open up all sorts of other things. So, long story short, no.
and you know, I completely agree with what you're saying. So, but the thing is, are you looking at that from a blinker perspective? Because, and it comes to the same kind of concept that you were talking about ethics. We might be ethical. I'm just using this. I'm not saying that China might not be ethical. They're going to use the technology. They're going to forge ahead. It's going to leave us in the background anyhow. So, like, we damned if we do and we damned if we don't. That's the reality of the situation. And I'm like, didn't the Industrial Revolution already do this? It took all the jobs away from the factory workers. But what it did is it created an automobile industry that allowed every person to have an automobile. It changed the way that the model worked in terms of it wasn't necessarily about selling the motor car anymore. It was about building different service plans on top of it. It created more work for engineers that had never been happening before in terms of the motor car vehicle. And that was an outcome that was only realized after we'd been through all of this. Now I come to something like, isn't this what's happening at the moment in the world with the movies? We've seen every single actor and every single writer walk out on the movie industry because they're scared that the AI is going to be taken over. I can tell you now that the Writers Guild has been using AI, not from ChatGPT, but for quite some time, to write scripts and to get scripts written in time and that. So it's happening, whether we like it or not. It's like, didn't Bob Marley sing about it? Like, you can, like, you're trying to stop the nuclear change and it's going to happen anyhow, so like you might as well go with the flow.
We're a bit pressed for time. If you want to make
I have to add something onto this. Because, you know, from where we sit and as an organization in particular, and the markets that we serve, and thinking about this colossal problem that we have in South Africa, and in terms of some of the comments that's just been made, where we have strong disparities, right? And we're trying to bring people into a fold, whether through a financially inclusive perspective, whether somebody that's sitting, you know, just the cost of living is heavy, and it's heavy if you're in the rural. So how do we balance this together with technology? And in terms of answering your question from a maturity perspective, no, we're not mature enough, but we're trying to find the balance. Which is what I was trying to say earlier on, in terms of the channels and how we service, with what we're trying to achieve within those markets, at the same time understanding who our customer is, building those ecosystems, and using all of the tools available, but without scaring the customer at the same time. So no, yeah, I agree, we're not mature, But we try at a level that we think we need to bring appropriate services. But we're working with disparities, and I think we need to bring that into.
It'll be better leapfrog because otherwise we're going to get left behind here.
We are.
I wish we had 4 hours scotch and cigars. This can get very philosophical. I love it.
Absolutely.
Thank you to the panelists. Thank you so much. Please give them a